With trembling hands clutching her final $83, Rebecca Mitchell stood at the precipice of a new beginning, or perhaps a cruel joke. 3 months of living in her hatchback with dwindling substitute. Teaching gigs had hollowed her cheeks and etched worry lines around her eyes, but couldn't extinguish the stubborn flicker of hope that had kept her going since the school district's budget cuts had eliminated her position, and medical bills from her cancer treatment had forced her into bankruptcy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The certified letter she held announcing her inheritance of her estranged uncle's abandoned quarry in the Colorado mountains seemed more like a cosmic punchline than salvation. The property was reportedly worthless, the quarry depleted decades ago. The equipment rusted beyond repair, and worse still, her late husband's wealthy family, the Prestons, were already contesting the will, claiming she was unfit to manage any estate after her financial collapse. Rain pelted the windshield of Rebecca's 15-year-old Honda as she navigated the winding mountain roads toward Granite Peak Quarry. The property had been in her mother's family for generations, though Rebecca had never visited. Her mother had left Colorado at 18, severing all ties with her brother, Rebecca's uncle Malcolm Sullivan, refusing to ever explain what had caused their irreparable rift. "Are we really going to live in a quarry, Mom?" asked Jamie, her voice small but tinged with adventure. From the back seat, the 11-year-old clutched his weathered journal where he meticulously documented rocks and minerals, the one constant passion in a life that had become increasingly unstable since his father's sudden death from a heart attack 3 years ago. "I'm not sure yet, sweetheart," Rebecca answered. "We're just checking it out first. The lawyer said it needs a lot of work." That was an understatement. According to Walter Finch, the gruff attorney who had tracked Rebecca down at the community college where she'd been sleeping in her car between teaching assignments, "Your Uncle Malcolm was eccentric," Finch had explained delicately. "The quarry has been abandoned for decades. Most locals consider it worthless, but Malcolm was adamant that it go to you specifically, despite never having met you." What Finch had failed to mention was the fierce opposition from the Preston family. Edward Preston had been the cherished heir to one of Denver's oldest mining families until he'd fallen in love with Rebecca, a public school teacher with nothing to her name but student loan debt and dreams of inspiring young minds. The Prestons had disowned him, only to reappear like vultures when a sudden heart attack claimed him at 42, leaving Rebecca and Jamie with nothing but crushing medical bills and funeral expenses. Now they were contesting Malcolm's will, claiming Rebecca was an unfit guardian who shouldn't be entrusted with any property, no matter how worthless. Their real motivation, Rebecca suspected, was simple spite, a continuation of their campaign to erase any connection between the prestigious Preston name and the woman they considered beneath their son's station. The dilapidated wooden sign at the property entrance was barely visible through the downpour. Granite Peak Quarry Est, 1896. The access road was little more than a muddy track winding up a steep hillside to what appeared to be an abandoned industrial site. A small caretaker's cottage stood to one side, its windows dark, its roof sagging precariously on the western edge. "It looks like something from a horror movie," Jamie whispered, though his eyes shone with fascination rather than fear as they sat in the idling car, gathering courage to make a dash through the rain. "It's just old and forgotten," Rebecca replied, trying to inject optimism she didn't feel. "Like those archaeological sites you love reading about, waiting for someone to uncover its secrets." Jamie brightened at this perspective. "Do you think we might find fossils? Or cool mineral specimens?" "Maybe," Rebecca smiled, grateful for her son's ability to find wonder even in their desperate circumstances. "Let's go see what we've got." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They made a dash through the rain to the cottage, huddling under the small porch roof as Rebecca fumbled with the ancient key Finch had provided. The lock turned with reluctant protest, and the door swung inward to reveal darkness and the musty odor of abandonment. Rebecca felt along the wall for a light switch, shocked when the bare bulb overhead actually flickered to life. "The utilities are still connected," she remarked with genuine surprise. "Mr. Finch arranged it," came a voice from behind them, causing both Rebecca and Jamie to jump. A woman in her early 40s stood on the porch, rain dripping from her practical rain jacket. "Sorry to startle you. I'm Ellie Sanderson, geologist from the university. I've been cataloging the area for research purposes. Finch asked me to check in, make sure you found the place all right." "We did." "Thank you," Rebecca replied cautiously, instinctively drawing Jamie closer. Years of hardship had taught her to be wary of unexpected kindness. Sanderson seemed to sense her hesitation. "I've left some firewood inside and stocked the kitchen with basics. The heating system is unpredictable at best. Call if you need anything. My number's by the phone in the kitchen." With a nod, she turned and disappeared back into the rain before Rebecca could properly thank her. The cottage interior was like stepping into a time capsule. Simple, sturdy furniture from another era filled the small living room. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with volumes whose titles Rebecca couldn't make out through the dust. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and above it hung a portrait of a stern-faced man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to follow their movements. "Is that him? Great-Uncle Malcolm?" Jamie asked, his voice hushed as if they were in a museum. "I think so," Rebecca answered, studying the face for any resemblance to her mother or herself. There was something in the set of the jaw perhaps that reminded her of her own determination. As darkness fell, Rebecca managed to start a fire in the ancient fireplace and prepare a simple meal from the supplies Sanderson had left. They ate sitting on cushions before the fire, as most of the furniture was covered in dust sheets. Jamie, exhausted from the journey and overwhelmed by their new circumstances, fell asleep wrapped in an old quilt Rebecca had found in a cedar chest. Alone with her thoughts, she wandered through the small cottage, trying to assess what she'd gotten them into. The place was in disrepair, but not beyond saving. The bones seemed solid, though everything needed updating. In the corner of the living room stood a massive roll-top desk, its surface covered with papers, ledgers, and dusty file folders. Rebecca approached it hesitantly, feeling like an intruder despite being the legal owner of everything around her. This was where she would need to start sorting through paperwork to determine what needed to be kept and what could be discarded. As she began organizing the scattered documents, Rebecca found mostly what she expected: utility bills, property tax statements, equipment maintenance records. But buried beneath the mundane paperwork, she discovered a leather-bound journal wedged beneath a stack of geological surveys. The binding was worn, its pages yellowed with age. Opening it, Rebecca recognized the handwriting as similar to that on the deed Finch had shown her, bearing Malcolm's distinctive script. The journal entries dated back decades, chronicling not just the quarry's operations, but occasionally veering into cryptic territory. Rebecca flipped through the pages, searching for any mention of her mother or clues about why the family had fractured. Instead, she found a disturbing entry from 1992. "They're watching the property. They know I haven't revealed what's within the western chamber. The Prestons have always suspected the truth." The Prestons. Rebecca's pulse quickened. Her late husband's family. What possible connection could they have to her uncle's quarry, decades before she'd even met Edward? She turned more pages, finding increasingly mysterious entries about survey lines being deliberately misdrawn, and the old geological analysis showing what truly lies beneath Granite Peak's weathered face. One page contained nothing but a sequence of numbers and letters that resembled coordinates, followed by the cryptic note, "The vein lies where the 3 granite pillars meet at the abandoned shaft." As she closed the journal, Her elbow knocked a small metal object from the desk. Bending to retrieve what looked like an antique miner's compass, Rebecca noticed something odd about the floorboard where it had fallen. One plank seemed slightly different from the others, the grain pattern inconsistent, the edges more precisely cut. Heart suddenly racing for reasons she couldn't articulate, Rebecca pressed her fingers against the board and felt a slight give. She applied more pressure to one end, and to her astonishment, it pivoted upward, revealing a small hollow space beneath the floor. Inside was a brass key unlike any modern one she'd seen, large, with an intricate pattern on its bow and a complex bit at the end. The kind of key that would open something old and significant. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rumbled in the distance. Lightning briefly illuminated the room, casting strange shadows across the walls. Jamie stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. Rebecca held the key up to the dim light, running her thumb over the ornate engravings. What did it open? And what did it have to do with the Preston family who were at that very moment trying to take this inheritance from her? She returned to the desk, searching more thoroughly. In a drawer beneath stacks of old correspondence, she found a small metal box locked with a simple latch. The brass key didn't fit this lock, but a letter opener from the desk drawer worked as an improvised tool. Inside was a yellowed map of the quarry, much larger than she'd been led to believe, with several areas marked with strange symbols. One location was circled repeatedly, a spot deep within the western face labeled only with the initials GVD. Beneath the map was a black and white photograph of three men standing before what appeared to be a mine shaft entrance. One was clearly a younger Malcolm, his stern expression already forming. Beside him stood a man who bore a striking resemblance to Edward's father, a Preston ancestor perhaps. The third man Rebecca didn't recognize, but all three held specialized equipment and wore expressions that suggested their discovery was significant. Scrawled on the back of the photograph in Malcolm's distinctive handwriting, Main Test Shaft 1968, discovery confirmed, GVD worth millions if claims properly filed. Rebecca's breath caught. GVD, gold vein deposit? Was it possible? Had her uncle discovered something valuable beneath the supposedly worthless quarry? And did the Prestons somehow know about it? A sudden knock at the door made her jump, her heart pounding. Who would be visiting in this storm at nearly midnight? Carefully returning the items to their hiding place and ensuring the loose floorboard was back in position, Rebecca approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, she could make out Ellie Sanderson, rainwater streaming from her jacket. Rebecca opened the door a crack, the security chain still engaged. "Sorry to disturb you so late," Sanderson said, her expression serious. "But I thought you should know. There's a car parked about half a mile down the road. Black Range Rover with tinted windows. Been there about an hour." "Could be anyone," Rebecca suggested, though a chill ran down her spine. Sanderson shook her head. "Not around here. Not at this hour. Not in this weather. Thought you should know, especially with the boy." She nodded toward where Jamie slept by the fire. "Lock up tight. I'll be keeping an eye out from my research cabin." After she left, Rebecca double-checked all the doors and windows, suddenly aware of how vulnerable they were in this isolated mountain cottage. The Preston family was wealthy and influential. If they suspected what Rebecca was beginning to, that this worthless property might actually contain something valuable, what might they do to ensure it remained in their control? Sleep eluded her as she sat beside Jamie, the fire slowly dying to embers. Her mind raced with questions. Why had her mother never mentioned any of this? What had caused the rift between her and Malcolm? And most pressingly, was there really something valuable hidden in the quarry? Something worth millions, as the photograph suggested. Dawn arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the grime-covered windows. The storm had passed, leaving a soggy landscape and a clear sky. Rebecca had dozed off sometime in the early hours, waking with a start as Jamie shook her gently. "Mom, someone's outside," he whispered, his eyes wide. Rebecca sprang to her feet, peering through the front window. A sleek black Range Rover was parked in the muddy driveway, and a tall man in expensive outdoor jacket was making his way toward the porch, picking his way carefully around puddles. "Stay inside," Rebecca instructed Jamie, straightening her rumpled clothes before opening the door just as the man was about to knock. "Mrs. Preston." The man offered a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Victor Preston, Edward's cousin." "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "It's Miss Mitchell now," she corrected him. "I've gone back to my maiden name." If the correction bothered him, he didn't show it. "What brings you here, Mr. Preston?" Rebecca asked, making no move to invite him inside. "Concern, primarily," he replied smoothly. "This property is in terrible condition, hardly suitable for a child." His eyes moved past her to where Jamie stood in the doorway. "Our family was quite surprised to learn of Malcolm Sullivan's bequest to you." There must have been some confusion on the old man's part. "There was no confusion," Rebecca countered. "Mr. Finch explained that my uncle was very specific about his wishes." Preston's smile tightened. "Yes, well, Finch is nearly as ancient as Malcolm was. Regardless, I've come with a proposition that might benefit everyone. The Preston Foundation is prepared to offer you $125,000 for the property, far more than it's worth in its current state. You could make a fresh start somewhere more appropriate for a young mother and child." The amount was tempting enough to secure an apartment and give them stability for a few months while Rebecca found work. But after what she had discovered last night, $125,000 seemed suspiciously low if there was indeed something valuable on the property. "That's very generous," Rebecca said carefully. "But I'm not ready to make any decisions yet. We've only just arrived." Something hardened in Preston's expression. "I understand, but I should warn you. This type of isolated property can be dangerous. Abandoned quarries, old equipment, structural collapses. It would be tragic if anything happened while you were evaluating your options." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Rebecca felt a surge of protective anger. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Preston. I'll be sure to have the property thoroughly inspected. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a busy day ahead." As Preston returned to his vehicle, Rebecca noticed Ellie Sanderson watching from the edge of the property, her stance suggesting she'd been prepared to intervene if necessary. The geologist nodded to Rebecca once before disappearing back toward what must be her research station. "Mom, who was that man?" Jamie asked once they were alone. "Someone who knew your dad's family," Rebecca answered, not wanting to frighten her son with the full truth. "He wanted to buy the quarry from us." "Are we going to sell it?" Jamie's voice held a note of disappointment. Despite its condition, the quarry represented stability after months of uncertainty. "Not yet," Rebecca decided. "First, I think we need to explore what great-uncle Malcolm left for us. There might be more here than meets the eye." Over breakfast prepared on the ancient but functional stove, Rebecca formulated a plan. She needed to understand what GVD meant beyond the obvious gold reference and why the woo that Prestons were so interested in a supposedly worthless property. Most importantly, she needed to find what the brass key opened. "Can we explore outside?" Jamie asked, his initial fascination with the quarry growing stronger in daylight. "Yes, but stay where I can see you," Rebecca cautioned. "Some areas might not be safe." The quarry spread out before them as they stepped onto the porch. Once productive excavation sites, now reclaimed by nature, stretched toward distant hills. Several dilapidated structures stood in various states of disrepair: an equipment shed, an office building, and what appeared to be an entrance to a tunnel system carved into the mountainside. Was great-uncle Malcolm a miner? Jamie asked as they made their way toward the largest structure. "I think so, once," Rebecca replied. "But he must have stopped active quarrying a long time ago." The equipment shed's door protested with a screech of rusted hinges as Rebecca pulled it open. Inside, shafts of sunlight cut through gaps in the roof, illuminating dancing dust motes. Mining equipment sat abandoned, a small excavator, various tools whose purposes Rebecca couldn't identify, hard hats and safety gear hanging from pegs on the wall. While Jamie cautiously explored the safer areas of the shed, Rebecca consulted the property map she'd brought from the cottage, looking for the area marked GVD. "Jamie, stay inside for a minute. I'm going to check something out by the main tunnel," Rebecca called, receiving a distracted acknowledgement as her son examined a shelf of mineral specimens. The main tunnel entrance was partially collapsed, but still accessible. Rebecca picked her way through the debris, comparing landmarks to the map. After about 50 yards inside, using her phone's flashlight, she spotted them, 3 massive granite pillars arranged in a rough triangle, just as the cryptic note had indicated. They seemed deliberately preserved, too uniform to be a natural formation. As she approached, Rebecca noticed something odd about the rock face between the pillars. While the surrounding walls were rough-hewn, this section appeared smoother, more deliberately finished. At the center, nearly hidden by fallen debris, was what appeared to be a metal door set into the rock face. Heart pounding, Rebecca knelt beside it, clearing away decades of accumulated rubble. The door was made of steel, approximately 3 feet square, with a sophisticated lock mechanism that appeared remarkably well maintained compared to everything else on the property. In the center of the lock was a keyhole that looked like it would accommodate the brass key she'd found. "Mom!" Jamie's voice called from the entrance. "I found a box with photographs." "Coming, sweetheart," Rebecca called back, reluctantly leaving her discovery. She marked the location on her map and hurried back to the entrance, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this the entrance to whatever GVD referred to? A gold vein, perhaps, based on the old photograph? In the equipment shed, Jamie had pulled a wooden crate from beneath a workbench. Inside were dozens of photographs, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be official documents, all related to mining operations. One newspaper headline from 1970 caught Rebecca's eye. Disputed mineral claims in Clear Creek County. Dismissed by court. The accompanying article detailed how Malcolm Sullivan had filed claims for gold deposits allegedly discovered on his property, only to have them dismissed when survey maps presented by Preston Mining showed the deposits were actually located on their adjacent land. Malcolm had accused the Prestons of falsifying survey data, but lacked evidence to prove his allegations. "Look at this, Mom." Jamie held up a photograph of a smiling young woman standing beside Malcolm, a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Rebecca's mother. On the back was written, "Catherine, age 19, at the secondary shaft site. She understands what was stolen from us and will continue the fight if necessary." Rebecca's mother had known about whatever was hidden on the property. Had she fled not because of a rift with Malcolm, but to escape the conflict with the Prestons? And if so, why had she never returned or explained any of this to Rebecca? Their exploration was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Rebecca hurried to the shed entrance to see 2 black SUVs pulling up beside the cottage. Victor Preston emerged from the first, accompanied by 2 men whose outdoor attire couldn't disguise their intimidating physiques. From the second vehicle stepped an elderly woman, elegantly dressed despite the rugged setting and moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "Victoria Preston," Rebecca whispered, recognizing Edward's grandmother, the family matriarch who had never acknowledged Jamie even after Edward's death. "Who are they, Mom?" Jamie asked, sensing Rebecca's tension. "People we need to be careful around," Rebecca answered truthfully. "Stay behind me, okay?" They watched from the shed as the Prestons and their associates entered the cottage without so much as a knock. The casual violation of their space sent a surge of anger through Rebecca. "What do we do?" Jamie asked, his voice small. Before Rebecca could answer, she heard the rumble of another vehicle. Ellie Sanderson's Jeep skidded to a stop beside the SUVs. The geologist emerged with determination in her stride as she headed toward the cottage. "Stay here," Rebecca instructed Jamie, placing him in a corner of the shed, hidden from the entrance. "Don't come out until I call for you, no matter what you hear." With the property map and the brass key secured in her pocket, Rebecca hurried toward the confrontation unfolding on her porch. As Rebecca approached, she could hear raised voices, Sanderson demanding the Prestons leave private property. Victoria Preston's icy response claiming they had every right to be there as the rightful stewards of the region's mineral wealth. "Mrs. Mitchell," Victor Preston's tone shifted to false geniality as he spotted Rebecca. "We were just explaining to your friend here that we're conducting a routine inspection as part of the ongoing legal proceedings regarding this property. There are no ongoing legal proceedings that would authorize you to enter my home without permission," Rebecca countered, a confidence in her voice that surprised even her. "This property belongs to me and my son. Legally bequeathed by Malcolm Sullivan." Victoria Preston stepped forward, her steel-gray eyes appraising Rebecca coldly. "My dear, you're out of your depth. This dispute dates back long before you were born. Malcolm Sullivan was a thief and a fraud who spent decades trying to steal what rightfully belongs to the Preston family." "Interesting perspective," Rebecca replied. "I've been finding evidence that suggests exactly the opposite, that the Prestons falsified survey data in the 1960s to steal mineral rights that belonged to my uncle." A flicker of alarm crossed Victoria's composed features. "Whatever delusions Malcolm passed on to you will find no sympathy in any court. The surveys were verified by county officials." "Officials on the Preston payroll," Sanderson interjected. "Everyone in the geological community knows how your family operates, Mrs. Preston." Victoria ignored her, focusing on Rebecca. "Be reasonable. You're a bankrupt teacher with a young son. This property is worthless for quarrying. The granite deposits were depleted decades ago. Take our offer $180,000 now, and spare yourself years of pointless legal battles you cannot win." The increased offer confirmed Rebecca's suspicions. The Prestons were desperate to acquire the property, which meant whatever lay beneath it was significant. "I appreciate your concern for our welfare," Rebecca said, matching Victoria's cold tone. "But we'll be staying for now. Please leave my property before I call the sheriff." "A mistake," Victoria said softly. "One I hope you don't come to regret too severely." With a nod to her associates, she returned to her vehicle, Victor following after throwing a look at Rebecca that contained equal parts anger and calculation. As the SUVs pulled away, Sanderson lowered her voice. "You've stirred up the hornet's nest now," she observed. "They'll be back with lawyers, maybe worse. Why are you helping us?" Rebecca asked directly. "You don't know me." Sanderson's weathered face softened slightly. "I knew Malcolm. He was a good man, driven half-mad by what the Prestons did to him. He hired me 5 years ago to document the geological formations here. Told me someday his niece might come to claim what was rightfully hers." She gestured vaguely at Rebecca's disheveled appearance. "I didn't expect you'd be quite so desperate," Rebecca supplied with a hint of dark humor. "Determined," Sanderson corrected. "Malcolm would have approved. Now you'd better show me what you've found that's got the Prestons so rattled. They wouldn't send the family matriarch herself to deal with you." Rebecca led Sanderson to the cottage, where she showed her the journal, map, and photograph from beneath the floorboard. As the geologist examined the materials, Jamie returned from the shed, clutching a small metal container he'd discovered. "Look what I found, Mom," he exclaimed, setting the rusted box on the kitchen table. Unlike the other discoveries, this box had a simple clasp that opened without need of a key. Inside was a collection of geological reports, gold assays, and a small vial containing what appeared to be gold flecks embedded in quartz. Sanderson whistled softly as she examined the contents. Malcolm always maintained there was a major gold deposit on this property. The GVD he marked on the map stands for Gold Vein Deposit, a classification for a particular type of formation. The Prestons knew about it because Malcolm originally partnered with William Preston, Victor's grandfather, to develop the site. So what happened? Rebecca asked, spreading the documents across the table. According to Malcolm, the Prestons falsified the survey boundaries. Once they realized how valuable the deposit was, they used their influence with county officials to have the claim recordings altered. When Malcolm tried to fight it, they threatened him. Said they'd make sure he'd never sell an ounce of stone in the county again if he didn't drop it. Why didn't he just sell the quarry and move away? Rebecca wondered. Sanderson's expression grew solemn. Because he discovered the main gold vein was accessible from his property through an entrance that the Prestons didn't know about. He spent years secretly extracting small amounts, enough to sustain himself without drawing attention. But he always believed someday he'd find a way to prove the Prestons had swindled him and reclaim the entire deposit. And did he find proof? Rebecca asked. I don't know. He became increasingly secretive in his final years. All I know is he was absolutely certain the property rightfully belonged to his bloodline, and that someday justice would be served. Rebecca looked at the brass key she'd found. I think I know what this opens. There's a metal door between the 3 granite pillars in the main tunnel. Sanderson's eyes widened. That must be the secondary shaft entrance. Malcolm never showed me that, said some secrets were for family only. Then let's go see what my uncle wanted his family to find, Rebecca said, gathering the most important documents into a backpack. Jamie, stay close to me. The 3 made their way back to the granite pillars where Rebecca knelt beside the metal door. The brass key slid perfectly into the lock, turning with surprising ease given its age. The door opened to reveal a narrow shaft with metal rungs bolted into the rock face, leading down into darkness. Wait here with Jamie, Rebecca instructed Sanderson. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, take him somewhere safe away from the Prestons. Mom, no. Jamie protested, grabbing Rebecca's arm. What if you get hurt down there? Rebecca hugged her son tightly. I'll be careful, I promise. But we need to know what's down there before the Prestons come back. Ms. Sanderson will protect you if anything happens. Using the flashlight from her phone, Rebecca began her descent. The air grew cooler as she climbed down, carrying the earthy scent of rock dust and something metallic. After about 40 feet, her feet touched solid ground. The beam of her flashlight revealed a tunnel shored up with timber supports extending into darkness. The passage was surprisingly well maintained, with no sign of collapse or major deterioration. Malcolm had clearly invested significant effort in its upkeep. Rebecca followed the tunnel, which sloped gently downward for about 100 yards before opening into a larger chamber. What she saw there made her gasp. The walls glittered in her flashlight beam, veins of gold-flecked quartz running through the rock face. Small-scale mining equipment stood ready for use drills, carts, even a collection table for sorting ore. In the center of the chamber stood a wooden desk bearing more recent equipment, digital measuring tools, modern testing kits, and a laptop computer that appeared only a few years old. Malcolm had been actively working this site until recently, far more recently than anyone knew. On the desk was a leather-bound ledger, different from the journal Rebecca had found in the cottage. Inside were meticulous records of gold extracted, processed, and sold through various anonymous channels. According to Malcolm's calculations, he had extracted over $3.5 million worth of gold in the last decade alone, a fortune he had apparently secreted away somewhere. But more significant was a folder labeled Proof. Inside, Rebecca found the original survey documents from the 1960s, alongside modern GPS coordinates and geological mappings. Malcolm had been building a case documenting how the Prestons had fraudulently altered property boundaries to claim the gold rights. According to his notes, the main deposit, worth an estimated $190 million at current market rates, lay directly beneath Granite Peak Quarry, with only a small portion extending onto Preston land. Most damning of all was a deathbed confession from a former county surveyor, notarized and dated just 4 years ago, admitting to altering records at William Preston's behest in exchange for a significant bribe. "This is what they're afraid of," Rebecca whispered. Malcolm had gathered enough evidence to not only reclaim the gold rights, but potentially sue the Preston family for decades of illegal mining and fraudulent appropriation. As she continued exploring the chamber, Rebecca discovered a small safe embedded in the rock wall. Beside it, scratched into the stone, "For Catherine's daughter when she is ready." Below was a 6-digit number, her birthday. With trembling fingers, Rebecca entered the date. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing stacks of cash, documents, and several thick envelopes. One envelope contained bearer bonds worth over $1.8 million. Another held a letter addressed to Rebecca specifically, dated just months before Malcolm's death. "My dear niece, if you are reading this, I have passed on without meeting you, my deepest regret. Your mother left to protect you from the Preston family's influence and threats. They've destroyed many lives in their pursuit of wealth, and Catherine feared you would become another casualty in a war that began before your birth. Everything you find here is yours by right, not just as my heir, but as the rightful owner of the gold deposit that sustained our family secretly for generations. The documents in the chamber provide legal proof of the Prestons' fraud. The attorney, Walter Finch, knows how to proceed when you're ready. Be cautious. The Prestons won't surrender their ill-gotten empire without a fight. But know this, you come from a line of survivors and fighters. In your veins runs the blood of those who never surrendered to intimidation or injustice. Your inheritance isn't just gold, but the strength to reclaim what was stolen from us. With love and faith in you, Malcolm Sullivan." Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she read her uncle's words. All these years he'd been preparing not just a financial legacy, but the means to restore justice to a family wronged decades in the making. She carefully gathered the most crucial items, the legal documents, the confession, the bearer bonds, and Malcolm's letter into her backpack. The cash and other valuables would remain secure in the hidden chamber until she decided how to proceed. As Rebecca climbed back up to the surface, her mind raced with possibilities. The evidence she carried could destroy the Preston family's reputation and fortune. The legal battle would be brutal, but with Malcolm's meticulous documentation and the former surveyor's confession, they stood a real chance of winning. She emerged from the shaft to find Sanderson and Jamie waiting anxiously. "You were down there forever," Jamie exclaimed, throwing his arms around Rebecca's waist. "What did you find?" "Everything," she replied softly. "Malcolm left us everything we need to take down the Prestons and reclaim what's ours." She quickly explained her discoveries as they made their way back to the cottage. Sanderson listened in growing amazement, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. Malcolm was always 3 steps ahead of everyone, she marveled. "But you need to be careful. Once the Prestons realize what you've found, they'll stop at nothing to silence you." "We need to get these documents to Finch immediately," Rebecca decided, "and then find somewhere safe to stay while he prepares the legal case." As they approached the cottage, Sanderson suddenly raised her hand, signaling them to stop. "Something's wrong," she whispered, drawing them behind a large pine tree. "The door's open, and I closed it when we left." Through the kitchen window, they could see figures moving inside the cottage, the same men who had accompanied the Prestons earlier, systematically searching every corner of the property. "They're looking for Malcolm's evidence," Rebecca realized, clutching her backpack tighter. "We need to leave now." Sanderson led them along the tree line toward her jeep, parked behind the equipment shed, out of sight from the cottage. They had almost reached it when the snap of a twig behind them made them freeze. "Ms. Mitchell," Victor Preston's voice called smoothly. "I believe you have something that belongs to my family." They turned to find him standing 20 yards away, a pistol held casually at his side. His expression was calm, almost regretful. "The only things I have are what my uncle left me," Rebecca replied, pushing Jamie behind her, "which is considerably more than the worthless property you tried to buy from me this morning." Preston's smile tightened. "Malcolm Sullivan was a thief who stole geological data from my grandfather and spent decades trying to undermine our rightful claims. Whatever you found in that shaft is Preston property." "The county surveyor's confession says otherwise," Rebecca countered, "as do the original unaltered survey documents Malcolm preserved. Your family falsified boundaries, bribed officials, and stole a fortune that rightfully belonged to the Sullivans." "Those are serious accusations," Preston said, his voice hardening as he raised the pistol slightly. "Accusations that would be difficult to prove if those documents were to disappear along with anyone who'd seen them." Sanderson subtly shifted, placing herself between Rebecca, Jamie, and Preston. "You're making a mistake, Victor," she warned. "This isn't the 1960s when your family could make people disappear without consequences." "On the contrary," Preston replied, "some things never change. This will simply be another unfortunate accident on a dilapidated property. A tragedy for the bankrupt teacher and her son, who unwisely tried to explore an unsafe mine shaft." Before he could raise the pistol further, the sound of sirens cut through the air. Multiple sheriff's vehicles appeared on the road leading to the quarry, lights flashing. "I called them before we left the cottage," Sanderson explained as relief washed over Rebecca. "Told them trespassers were threatening the new property owners. The sheriff owes me a favor, one of the few officials the Prestons don't control." Preston's composure cracked. He glared at them with naked hatred before concealing the pistol in his jacket and adopting a casual stance as the first deputies approached. "This isn't over," he hissed. "No court in this county will rule against us, no matter what evidence you think you have." "Then it's fortunate the federal authorities have jurisdiction over mining fraud and racketeering," came a new voice. Walter Finch appeared beside the lead deputy, his elderly frame somehow imposing in its dignity. "Ms. Mitchell, I received your geologist's call. I took the liberty of contacting an old law school friend who works for the Justice Department. He's very interested in the documents your uncle mentioned in his will." Finch smiled gently. "Malcolm kept track of you from afar. Knew you married Edward Preston against his family's wishes. Knew you stayed by his side through his illness despite the Prestons cutting him off. Knew you fought to keep your son educated even when everything was against you. Malcolm recognized his own determination in you. The realization that her uncle had been watching over her all along, even as she struggled through the hardest years of her life, brought fresh tears to Rebecca's eyes. She hadn't been as alone as she'd thought. "There's something else you should know," Finch continued, opening another folder. "Malcolm established a trust fund for you and Jamie, separate from the property and mineral rights. He'd been selling small amounts of gold for decades, investing the proceeds conservatively. The fund currently holds approximately $2 million. Rebecca gasped. "What?" "He wanted to ensure that even if the legal battle with the Prestons took years, you and Jamie would be secure. As his executor, I can release those funds to you immediately." The world seemed to tilt beneath Rebecca's feet. Just days ago, she had been homeless, down to her last $83, wondering how she would feed her son the next month. Now she was not only financially secure, but positioned to reclaim a fortune worth far more, and perhaps more importantly, to bring justice to a family that had operated above the law for generations. As the reality of her new circumstances sank in, Rebecca felt not just relief, but a growing sense of purpose. Her uncle had entrusted her with more than wealth. He had given her the means to right a historic wrong, and the opportunity to transform not just her own life, but potentially the entire community that had suffered under the Prestons' influence. Malcolm always said the Sullivan legacy wasn't just about the gold in the mountain, Finch remarked, as if reading her thoughts. It was about standing firm against those who would take what isn't theirs, about protecting what matters most, about perseverance in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Rebecca thought of her son standing nervously nearby, finally safe after months of uncertainty. She thought of her late husband, Edward, who had defied his family to follow his heart. She thought of her mother, Catherine, who had left everything behind to protect her child from the Prestons' reach. And she thought of Malcolm, working alone in that hidden shaft for decades, never surrendering to despair or intimidation, always believing that someday justice would prevail. "When do we file the case?" Rebecca asked, her voice steady and determined. Finch smiled. "First thing tomorrow. The Prestons won't know what hit them." As Finch gathered his papers to leave, Rebecca stepped onto the porch of the small mountain cabin that Sanderson had offered as temporary refuge. The night was clear, stars spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere in the distance lay Granite Peak Quarry, not the worthless property the Prestons had tried to buy for a pittance, but the gateway to a fortune they had stolen generations ago. More importantly, it was her heritage, the physical embodiment of her family's resilience and determination. Malcolm hadn't just left her gold. He had bequeathed her the chance to rewrite a story of injustice that had shaped 3 generations of her family. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of a legal battle that might take years to resolve. The Prestons would deploy every resource at their disposal to maintain their ill-gotten empire. But for the first time since Edward's death had sent her life spiraling into poverty and desperation, Rebecca felt equal to the challenge ahead. She wasn't just fighting for wealth or even justice in the abstract. She was fighting for her son's future, for her family's legacy, and for every person the Prestons had ever bullied, cheated, or threatened into submission. As she turned to go back inside, Rebecca caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window glass. Behind the exhaustion and worry that had become permanent fixtures on her face, she could see something new emerging, the same determined set of the jaw she had noticed in Malcolm's portrait. The unflinching gaze of someone who would not be intimidated or defeated. "Thank you, Uncle," she whispered to the night sky. "I won't let you down." Inside, she checked on Jamie once more, tucking the blanket around his sleeping form. Tomorrow would be another challenging day in what promised to be a long struggle. But they would face it with resources they hadn't possessed just days ago: financial security, powerful allies, compelling evidence, and most importantly, the knowledge that they were continuing a fight for justice that had spanned generations. The bankrupt teacher and her son, once dismissed as irrelevant by the powerful Preston family, now held the keys to their downfall. It wasn't just gold that lay hidden beneath Granite Peak Quarry. It was truth. And like the gold itself, the truth would endure, waiting patiently to be brought into the light. The morning light spilled through the curtains of Sanderson's cabin, finding Rebecca already awake, reviewing the documents spread across the dining table. Sleep had been elusive, her mind racing with the implications of everything she'd discovered. The weight of her uncle's trust felt both empowering and daunting, a chance to reclaim her family's legacy, but also to confront one of the region's most powerful families. A gentle knock on the door revealed Finch, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, accompanied by a tall woman with striking silver hair pulled into a neat bun. "Rebecca, this is Alexandra Morris," Finch introduced her. "Former federal prosecutor, now one of the top mining rights attorneys in the country. She's agreed to take our case." Morris extended a firm hand. "Walter told me the basics. I've been trying to build a case against the Prestons for years, but never had the evidence. What you found changes everything." As Jamie slept, the 3 adults gathered around the dining table with Morris examining each document methodically. Her expression remained professional, but Rebecca noticed a spark of excitement growing in her eyes. This surveyor's confession alone would merit an investigation, she observed, setting aside the notarized statement. But combined with the original unaltered survey documents and Malcolm's meticulous record-keeping, she looked up at Rebecca. "Ms. Mitchell, your uncle has provided us with the foundation for a historic case, but the Prestons have connections throughout the county." Victor implied no local court would rule against them, Rebecca pointed out. Morris smiled thinly. "Which is precisely why we're filing in federal court. Mining fraud crossing multiple decades, racketeering, potential environmental violations. This case is far beyond local jurisdiction. Moreover, these documents suggest the Prestons have been systematically evading federal taxes on their mining operation by misreporting the source and volume of their extractions." "How long will this take?" Rebecca asked, thinking of Jamie and their future. "Years, potentially," Morris answered honestly. "Cases of this magnitude aren't resolved quickly, especially against opponents with virtually unlimited resources for delay tactics. The trust fund will ensure you and Jamie are secure during the litigation," Finch reminded her. Malcolm anticipated a long battle. Rebecca nodded, feeling a renewed appreciation for her uncle's foresight. "And the quarry? Is it safe for us to return there?" Finch and Morris exchanged glances. "The sheriff has posted deputies at the property for now," Finch explained. "But I wouldn't recommend living there until we've taken formal legal steps to protect your interests. The Prestons' initial reaction will be aggressive. We need to file for emergency injunctions immediately," Morris added, "to prevent any further mining operations on the disputed land, and to secure all entrances to the underground deposits from both properties." As they finalized their strategy, Jamie emerged from the bedroom, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The adults paused their discussion, and Morris offered a warm smile that transformed her severe appearance. "You must be Jamie," she said. "Your great-uncle left some very important things for your mom to find." Jamie studied this stern-looking attorney before deciding she was trustworthy. "Is that why the scary men were at our quarry?" "Because of the treasure." "Something like that," Rebecca confirmed, pulling her son into a hug. "Ms. Morris is going to help us make sure those men can't bother us anymore." "Are we still going to live at the quarry?" Jamie asked, a note of hope in his voice despite yesterday's frightening events. Already, the dilapidated property represented more stability than they'd known in months. "Not right away," Rebecca explained gently. "We need to make sure it's safe first. But Mr. Finch has found us a place to stay in town while we work things out." Finch nodded. "A small house just a few blocks from here. Nothing fancy, but comfortable and secure. The trust fund can cover it easily." As they prepared to leave for the courthouse to file the initial documents, Rebecca's phone rang a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Mitchell," came a familiar voice when she answered. "Thomas Preston. I believe we need to talk." Rebecca tensed, putting the call on speaker so Finch and Morris could hear. "I think our families have said everything necessary to each other." "Not quite," Thomas replied, his tone surprisingly conciliatory. "I'm calling without my family's knowledge. I've recently learned some disturbing information about my grandfather's business practices, and I'd like to meet neutral ground, public place. No lawyers, just conversation." Morris shook her head vehemently, mouthing "trap" silently. "Why would I agree to that?" Rebecca asked, following Morris's lead. "Because I may have information that strengthens your case," Thomas answered, "and because I believe my family has made a grave error in how they've approached this situation, particularly yesterday's events." After a moment of silent consultation with her attorneys, Rebecca agreed to meet Thomas at a bustling cafe in the center of town, public enough to be safe, with Finch waiting inconspicuously at a nearby table. "This is extremely inadvisable," Morris warned as they prepared to depart. "The Prestons are desperate and cornered. A dangerous combination." That's exactly why I need to understand what Thomas wants, Rebecca countered. Malcolm's documents mention a rift in the Preston family years ago, disagreements about how the mining operation was managed. If Thomas truly has misgivings, he could be a powerful ally. The cafe was crowded when Rebecca arrived, providing the anonymity of numbers. She spotted Thomas immediately, tall like his cousin, but leaner, with a thoughtful face that lacked Victor's predatory calculation. He rose as she approached, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming," he began. "I know you have no reason to trust any Preston at this point." "None whatsoever," Rebecca agreed, studying him carefully. "Especially after your cousin threatened my son and me at gunpoint." Thomas's expression darkened. "I've only just learned of that incident. Victor has been relieved of his position in the family business, effective immediately." "By your grandmother?" Rebecca asked skeptically. "By me," Thomas replied. "Contrary to appearances, I became majority shareholder of Preston Mining last year when my father passed. My grandmother and cousin have operated largely unchecked because I've been focused on our legitimate businesses elsewhere. That changes today." Rebecca remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent the morning reviewing documents from our corporate archives," Thomas explained, sliding a folder across the table. "These corroborate many of Malcolm Sullivan's claims. The original survey boundaries were indeed altered by my grandfather in 1965, and there appears to have been systematic falsification of production records to conceal the extent of the deposit and its precise location." Rebecca glanced at the papers, internal memos, handwritten notes, and technical surveys that matched what Malcolm had documented in his hidden chamber. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked cautiously. Thomas leaned forward. "Because I want to offer a settlement, one that acknowledges the wrong done to your family while preserving what's salvageable of mine. Full acknowledgement of the Sullivan claim to the mineral rights. Compensation for all gold extracted illegally since 1965. With interest, our accountants estimate that figure at approximately $85 million. A public apology from the Preston family, and a 35% stake in the legitimate, properly licensed operation we would establish together moving forward." Rebecca blinked, stunned by the unexpectedly comprehensive offer. "Why would you do this?" Thomas's expression was solemn. "3 reasons. First, it's the right thing to do. I've built my reputation on ethical business practices, and I won't perpetuate a fraud begun by my grandfather, no matter the cost. Second, the alternative is worse. If this goes to federal court, the Preston family won't just lose the gold rights, will face criminal charges, massive fines, and the complete destruction of businesses that employ hundreds of people in this region. And third," he hesitated, "Edward was my cousin. I respected his decision to marry for love rather than family advantage. The way my family treated him during his illness and afterward was unconscionable. I can't undo that, but I can ensure his widow and son receive what they're rightfully owed." Rebecca sat back, processing his words. The offer was generous by any standard, life-changing money and ongoing income from the gold field without years of uncertain litigation. "I'll need to consult my attorneys," she said finally. Thomas nodded. "Of course, but there's a complication. My grandmother and Victor don't know I've approached you, and they're planning their own countermove." "What kind of countermove?" "They filed emergency motions to have the entire Granite Peak property condemned as unsafe, citing yesterday's confrontation as evidence of dangerous conditions. They're also attempting to challenge Malcolm's mental competency at the time he changed his will to name you as beneficiary." Rebecca's anger flared. "Your family is relentless." "The old guard is," Thomas agreed. "But they don't speak for all of us anymore. I need your answer within 48 hours before their legal maneuvers gain traction." Back at Finch's office, Rebecca relayed the conversation to her legal team. Morris examined Thomas's documents with professional skepticism. "These appear authentic," she admitted reluctantly. "And the offer is surprisingly fair, more than fair, actually. The question is whether we can trust Thomas to honor it when his family will undoubtedly fight him every step of the way. There's also the matter of Malcolm's wishes," Finch added quietly. "He spent his life building a case for full restoration of his rights. Would he want you to settle, even for such a substantial amount?" Rebecca considered this as she watched Jamie drawing contentedly in the corner of the office. Her son's future security was paramount, more important than abstract notions of complete vindication. "Malcolm wanted justice," she said slowly. "But he also wanted to ensure his family was protected. I think he would understand pragmatism, especially if it means Jamie and I can move forward without years of ugliness and uncertainty." Morris nodded. "If you want to accept Thomas's offer, we'll draft settlement terms that protect your interests completely, ironclad guarantees. Independent auditing of the mining operation. Full disclosure of all historical extraction data." "And what about the rest of the Preston family?" Rebecca asked. "Thomas may be sincere, but his grandmother and cousin tried to intimidate us off the property just yesterday." "That's the greatest risk," Finch acknowledged. "Even as majority shareholder, Thomas will face significant internal opposition." Their discussion was interrupted by a commotion in the outer office. The door burst open to reveal Victoria Preston herself, imperious and rigid with fury, flanked by two men in expensive suits. "So it's true," the family matriarch spat, her cold gaze fixed on Rebecca. "My grandson has betrayed his family heritage to negotiate with you behind our backs." Morris rose, interposing herself between Victoria and Rebecca. "Mrs. Preston, this is a private legal consultation. I must ask you to leave immediately." Victoria ignored her. "Whatever Thomas has offered you, I'm prepared to double it with one condition: you sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and leave this county permanently. Take your money and your child and disappear." The naked hostility in the elderly woman's voice sent a chill through Rebecca. This wasn't just about business or mineral rights. This was a personal vendetta spanning generations. "Mrs. Preston," Rebecca replied calmly, "I'm not interested in being paid to disappear. My uncle left me more than money. He left me the truth about what your family did to him. That truth deserves to be acknowledged, not buried under more secrecy." Victoria's composure cracked, revealing the rage beneath. "Your uncle was a thief who tried to steal what belonged to the Prestons. Just like your mother tried to steal my son away, filling his head with nonsense about love and family beyond his proper station." The outburst froze everyone in the room. Even Victoria's companions looked uncomfortable at this unexpected revelation. "My mother?" Rebecca whispered, stunned. Victoria remained rigid with fury. "This changes nothing. The Sullivan claim is still fraudulent, and we will fight it through every court in this country if necessary." "No, we won't," Thomas countered firmly, stepping into the room from behind his grandmother. "The board meeting this morning was quite clear. As CEO and majority shareholder, I've been authorized to negotiate a full settlement acknowledging the Sullivan claim and compensating the family for decades of illegal extraction." "You'll destroy everything your grandfather built," Victoria seethed. "My grandfather built an empire on stolen rights," Thomas replied evenly. "I'm choosing to rebuild it on honesty and restitution." The vote was 8-2, grandmother. Only you and Victor opposed the settlement. Victoria Preston drew herself up, dignity reasserting itself over rage. "This isn't finished. The Preston legacy won't be dismantled by a sentimental fool and a bankrupt gold digger." With that, she swept from the room, her attorneys following in awkward silence. When they were gone, Thomas turned to Rebecca. "I apologize for my grandmother's behavior and for the shock of learning about your parentage this way. I had hoped to break that news more gently." Rebecca was still processing the revelation. "My mother never told me who my father was." She always changed the subject when I asked. She was protecting you, Thomas suggested, and possibly Charles as well. He never stopped loving her, by all accounts, though he eventually married someone my grandparents deemed suitable. He died when I was very young. The parallels were striking her mother and Charles, then Rebecca and Edward. Both relationships severed by the Preston family's rigid adherence to class distinctions and dynastic ambitions. Does this change your settlement offer? Rebecca asked, coming back to the practical reality of their situation. Not at all, Thomas assured her. If anything, it strengthens my resolve to make this right. You and Jamie are Prestons by blood, whether my grandmother accepts it or not. The fortune built from that gold belongs partly to you by heritage as well as by legal right. Morris cleared her throat. If you're both amenable, I suggest we proceed immediately with drafting the settlement agreement. The sooner we have signatures on paper, the better for all concerned. The next hours were consumed with legal details as Morris and Finch worked with Thomas's attorneys to craft a comprehensive settlement that would protect Rebecca's interests while allowing the Preston mining operation to continue under new, legitimate parameters. Late in the afternoon, as the final documents were being prepared, Rebecca stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. The day's revelations had left her emotionally drained. Her entire understanding of her family history had been upended. Yet somehow, Malcolm had known or suspected the truth all along. His determination to reclaim his rights from the Prestons had taken on new meaning. He had been fighting not just for justice, but for his niece and her son's rightful heritage. Thomas joined her on the steps of the law office. Are you all right? He asked simply. I'm not sure, Rebecca admitted. Yesterday, I was a homeless teacher with a worthless inheritance. Today, I'm a millionaire with a gold mine and a family connection to the people who tried to steal it from me. It's a lot to process. For what it's worth, I think Edward would be proud of how you've handled all this, Thomas offered. He always said you were the strongest person he knew. Rebecca smiled faintly at the memory of her late husband. He was biased. He was right, Thomas countered. Not many people would have stood up to the Prestons the way you have. Fewer still would consider a settlement that leaves the family with any dignity intact. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Rebecca asked the question that had been bothering her. Why didn't you approach me when Edward was sick, when we were losing everything to medical bills and your family had cut him off? Thomas's expression clouded with regret. I was in South Africa managing our international operations. By the time I returned and learned what had happened, Edward was gone, and you had disappeared. I tried to find you, but you'd already left town. He hesitated. I'd like to think I would have helped had I known. Rebecca nodded, accepting his explanation without fully absolving him. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, Jamie's future, could be secured through the decisions they were making today. When they returned inside, the settlement documents were ready. Rebecca read through each page carefully under Morris's guidance before signing her name. Thomas followed suit, his signature marking the end of a conflict that had spanned 3 generations. I'll file these with the court immediately, Morris announced. Once approved, the first compensation payment will be transferred within 10 business days. And the mining operation? Rebecca asked. Joint operations can begin as soon as we secure the proper federal permits, Thomas explained. The geological surveys suggest at least 20 more years of productive extraction with modern methods. As they gathered their documents, Finch drew Rebecca aside. There's one more matter we should discuss. Granite Peak Quarry itself. What are your plans for the property? Rebecca had been considering this question throughout the negotiations. The quarry represented both her uncle's legacy and the site of a traumatic confrontation. Yet it also offered possibilities that hadn't existed before. I want to restore it, she decided. Not just the cottage and outbuildings, but the land itself. Malcolm's notes mentioned the area was degraded from years of poor management. I'd like to rehabilitate it, make it not just a mining operation, but an educational center, a place where local schools can learn about geology, sustainable mining practices, and environmental stewardship. Finch nodded approvingly. Malcolm would be pleased. He always maintained that the real wealth wasn't just beneath the ground, but in what we choose to build upon it. Later, as Rebecca and Jamie settled into the small house Finch had arranged for them, she reflected on the whirlwind changes of the past 48 hours, from homelessness to wealth, from isolation to discovering an extended family, however complicated, and from helplessness to having the power to shape her own destiny. "Mom, are we rich now?" Jamie asked as Rebecca tucked him into bed. "We're secure," Rebecca answered thoughtfully, "which is better than rich. We won't have to worry about where we'll sleep or what we'll eat ever again." "And the quarry? Can we make it awesome like in my drawing?" Jamie held up a sketch he'd made during the long hours at the law office. The quarry transformed with modern facilities, educational displays, and what appeared to be a rock museum. Rebecca smiled at her son's vision. "We can make it even better, but it will take time and hard work." "That's okay," Jamie replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. "The best things always do." As Jamie drifted to sleep, Rebecca returned to the kitchen table where Malcolm's journal lay open. She traced her finger over his firm handwriting, feeling a connection to the uncle she'd never known, but who had planned so carefully for her future. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, "for not giving up, for believing justice would eventually prevail. For leaving us more than gold, you left us truth and dignity, and those are worth more than all the gold in that mountain." 6 months transformed Granite Peak Quarry beyond recognition. What had once been a dilapidated property shunned by locals was now a center of careful restoration and renewal. The cottage stood proudly against the autumn sky, its sagging porch rebuilt, windows gleaming, fresh paint glowing warmly in the afternoon sun. The equipment shed had been transformed into a visitor center, and the entrance to the main tunnel converted into a safe educational exhibit that demonstrated traditional and modern mining techniques. Rebecca stood on the observation platform, watching as a group of middle school students listened attentively to a guide explaining sustainable mining practices. Another group was examining rock samples in the new geology lab built where the old office building had stood. "The educational program is exceeding all expectations," Ellie Sanderson observed, joining Rebecca with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She had stayed on as the center's educational director, her knowledge of geology and passion for teaching proving invaluable. "And the environmental remediation?" Rebecca asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Making impressive progress. The water quality in the stream has improved 60% since we implemented the filtration system. And the native plant restoration is taking hold faster than expected." The settlement with the Prestons had been finalized 3 months earlier, with surprisingly little additional drama. The federal court had approved the terms. The initial compensation payment of $85 million had been transferred to Rebecca's accounts, and the joint venture had received its permits with record speed, thanks partly to Alexandra Morris's connections in Washington. Only Victoria and Victor Preston had maintained their opposition, filing a series of increasingly desperate legal challenges that were summarily dismissed. Their final attempt a petition claiming Rebecca was mentally unfit to manage her son's interests due to trauma-induced delusions had backfired spectacularly when the judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation of Victoria instead, citing her disturbing pattern of vindictive litigation. 2 weeks after that humiliation, Victoria Preston had suffered a severe stroke. She now resided in exclusive care facility, her once formidable mind diminished. Victor had fled to Europe, effectively exiled from the family business by Thomas's newly consolidated leadership. "Mom, come see." Jamie's excited voice called from the edge of the newly established native plant garden. They'd selected drought-resistant species that would help stabilize the soil and prevent erosion around the quarry. Rebecca found her son kneeling beside a small rock garden, carefully placing specimens in a decorative arrangement. "I'm creating a geological timeline," Jamie explained, pointing to each rock. "These are the oldest at the bottom, then working up through the different periods. Dr. Sanderson helped me identify them." "It looks beautiful," Rebecca agreed, struck by how much her son had flourished in these past months. The shadows of uncertainty that had haunted Jamie during their homeless period had vanished, replaced by confidence and curiosity. The child who had once clutched his journal in fear now led tours for visiting school children, explaining geological principles with infectious enthusiasm. "Is Uncle Thomas coming to the ceremony tomorrow?" Jamie asked, arranging his specimens with careful precision. The term uncle had evolved organically as Thomas became a regular presence in their lives. The revelation of their biological connection had initially been shocking, but over time it had created an unexpected bridge between the Sullivan and Preston legacies, a living reminder that the two families had always been more intertwined than either had acknowledged. "He'll be there," Rebecca confirmed, "along with everyone else who helped us." Tomorrow marked the official opening of the Malcolm Sullivan Center for Geological Education and Environmental Stewardship, the non-profit organization Rebecca had established with a significant portion of the settlement funds. The center would provide educational programs, research grants, and community outreach causes Malcolm would have championed. The ceremony would also unveil the memorial garden, a peaceful space behind the cottage where they had interred Malcolm's ashes, finally brought home from the modest cemetery plot where he'd rested temporarily since his death. Beside the garden stood a small museum chronicling the quarry's history and the decades-long struggle for justice, testament to one man's unwavering belief that truth would eventually prevail. "Ms. Mitchell," a voice called from the visitor center. Rebecca turned to see Dr. Martin Chun, the center's newly appointed research director, approaching with a stack of files. "Sorry to interrupt, but I have the final list of grant applications for your review. 23 schools from across the state seeking assistance with everything from field trip funding to establishing their own geology labs." "I'll be right there," Rebecca responded, giving Jamie a quick hug before heading toward the center's new West Wing, which housed the Foundation's offices. Inside, the renovation had masterfully blended the historic character of the old quarry buildings with modern functionality. The original stone walls had been preserved and restored, while the technological infrastructure would have impressed any university research department. Staff members, many hired from local families who had once depended on Preston mining for employment, moved purposefully through the space, preparing for tomorrow's ceremony. In her office, Malcolm's former desk now restored as its centerpiece, Rebecca reviewed the grant applications with Dr. Chun. Each represented a school or community seeking to enhance earth science education, giving students the opportunity to understand the geological wonders beneath their feet and the importance of responsible stewardship. "I'd like to fund them all," Rebecca decided, closing the last file. "Set up site visits so we can determine the specific support each needs beyond financial assistance." Chun smiled. "I thought you might say that. I've already started scheduling the visits." He hesitated before adding, "One more thing. Victoria Preston's nurse called this morning. She's asking to see you." Rebecca stilled, surprised by the request. She had visited Victoria once after her stroke, a tense encounter where the elderly woman had been unable to speak but had communicated her continued hatred through eyes that remained sharp with resentment. "Did she say why?" "Apparently, she's been reviewing family albums with her therapist, part of her cognitive rehabilitation. She found something she wants to show you. The nurse thinks it might be important." Rebecca considered declining. The legal battles were over, the settlement finalized. There was no practical need to engage with Victoria again. Yet something, perhaps Malcolm's influence, urged her toward closure rather than continued animosity. "I'll go tomorrow afternoon after the ceremony," she decided. That evening, as sunset painted the mountain in golden crimson, guests began arriving for the pre-ceremony dinner. Finch came with his grandchildren, his frail frame belying the sharp legal mind that had helped orchestrate their victory. Alexandra Morris arrived with federal officials interested in the innovative educational programs being implemented. Teachers and environmental advocates from across the region mingled with local families who had quietly supported Malcolm through his decades of isolation. Thomas Preston arrived last, bringing news that had the gathering buzzing with excitement. The federal investigation into the historical mining fraud has uncovered evidence of similar schemes in 2 other counties, he announced. Families who lost their mineral rights decades ago, just like the Sullivans, may finally see justice. As darkness fell, lights illuminated the grounds, transforming the once abandoned property into a beacon visible for miles around. Standing on the observation platform, watching Jamie proudly showing Finch's grandchildren his rock collection, Rebecca felt a profound sense of rightness, as if pieces of a complex puzzle had finally aligned. "Malcolm would be proud," Sanderson said quietly, joining her at the railing. "Not just of the center or the quarry, but of how you've managed to transform conflict into cooperation." Rebecca smiled, thinking of the mining operation that now employed dozens of local workers under the joint Sullivan-Preston banner. The environmental restoration projects expanding to neighboring properties. The educational programs already welcoming hundreds of students each month. "He spent his life fighting for justice," she replied. "But I think what he really wanted was restoration of the land, of the truth, of his family's place in the community." The next morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect weather for the ceremony that brought over 300 people to Granite Peak Quarry. Local media covered the event, fascinated by the story of the bankrupt teacher who had inherited what appeared to be a worthless property, only to discover a fortune and a family legacy of perseverance. Standing at the podium erected near Malcolm's memorial garden, Rebecca looked out at the gathered crowd, a community united not by the divisions of the past, but by hope for the future. "My uncle Malcolm Sullivan never gave up," she began. "Not when powerful interests stole what was rightfully his. Not when he was isolated and labeled as crazy for speaking truth to power. Not when decades passed without justice. He kept faith that someday the truth would prevail." But Malcolm's vision wasn't just about righting a historical wrong. It was about stewardship of the land, of resources, of community trust. "The gold beneath this quarry is valuable, but what grows above it, what we build together on this ground, that's the true legacy he wanted to leave." As the ceremony concluded and the Malcolm Sullivan Center officially opened its doors, Rebecca knew that the story that had begun with her desperate arrival at a seemingly worthless quarry had transformed into something far more valuable than the minerals hidden beneath the soil. It had become a testament to the power of perseverance, to the enduring strength of truth, and to the possibility that even the deepest wounds could heal when justice finally prevailed. In the years to come, the center would help thousands of students discover their passion for earth sciences. The quarry would produce ethically sourced gold, and the educational programs would set new standards for community engagement. But perhaps most importantly, Jamie would grow up knowing the true meaning of wealth, not just the financial security that Malcolm's legacy had provided, but the courage to stand up for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The inheritance that had seemed worthless had proved to be priceless, not just in material terms, but in the legacy of perseverance and principle it represented. Malcolm Sullivan had fought not just for gold, but for truth. And in the end, that truth had set his family free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.